I'm going to talk to you guys about a few different bodies of work and a little bit about the trajectory of my work and where I am today and sort of the things that I did that helped me along the way. So I'm going to start with a series that's not on my website. It's called My Uncle Vinny. And they're portraits of my uncle and portraits, in a sense, of his personal objects. And I started working on this series after grad school. When I moved back home from San Francisco, I moved back with my family in Queens, which was my two uncles and my mom at the time. And I was photographing my family in grad school. I started photographing my family on vacations home inside the house and was making environmental portraits of them and thinking about the space, the domestic space of the interiors, and sort of everyone has their own chair, their own space in the house that they occupy, and that was interesting to me for a while. But then after I moved back in, I started to want to sort of take them out of that space, and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I did the white background. I made a studio in my basement, so you can see like the linoleum and where I stopped painting. I guess I got lazy or whatever. It's just a patch of wall that I painted in my basement since I didn't have a studio at that time. And I would take my Uncle Vinny, who is sort of my main muse and the most willing subject. I would take him down to the basement and bring my lights and photograph him. And that was sort of, an interesting bonding time for us in a way, making these portraits. And then during the day, I would take little objects off of his dresser when he wasn't paying attention. I would steal like one or two of them in the daytime, and then late at night go and photograph them and then put them back where I found them. And it was easy to place them back where I had taken them because they were covered in dust and there was like a little spot where the dust was back. So everything always went right back to where it was. My uncle used to collect holy water. So a few of the objects that you're seeing are actually holy water that he would collect. He was a very religious man, and a lot of his objects are religious. And in the series, I was thinking sort of about the power of objects and how our objects can speak so much to who we are, what we hold on to, what we have that's important, especially my uncle, because most of these things have been on his dresser my entire life. I grew up in this house, and not much had changed over the years, and all of these little objects were things that I had grown up seeing and know as a part of who he is. And it's hard to see in the slide, but in the print you can see the dust. I don't know if you see it by the snake. It's like light. There's like this light coating of like snow kind of dust on these objects. And these were all shot using a 4x5 view camera, so the prints are very detailed. And the objects, I printed the objects very small, sort of 8x10, because there were so many of them, and then I had made the portraits 30x40. And so I was juxtaposing the objects with the portraits of my uncle. And in a way, for me, the white space is sort of this way of pulling him out of the surrounding environment and thinking about, I guess that was the first time I started thinking about their age. My uncle at that time was 77 and was thinking about being here and gone, being in this intermediate space between knowing you have someone with you and knowing that you will lose them. I showed this work on the Lower East Side at a little gallery called Invisible. It was like a tattoo parlor in the back and a gallery in the front. It was a husband and wife who was a curator and a famous tattoo artist. So it was an interesting place to have a show. But the good thing about that is when you're asked to do a show at almost an artist run or a small space, you can kind of do what you want. I mean, they were excited to have me show, and they were interested in a different body of work, and I was just working on this. I hadn't even shot a lot of them. And I said, oh, I really have this idea. I really want to show this body of work, and I basically showed her contacts, and she said, yeah, I love your work, you do what you want. And so I think it's good, too, as artists to use the opportunities that you have where people give you artistic license or free reign, or they're not worried about how profitable it is or how not profitable it could potentially be, to really take that opportunity to experiment and to try new things. So this work was shown once in that space, and I took my uncle to see the show. I called a taxi, and they sent a limo. Actually, just that's what they had. So it's really interesting to ride from Queens to Manhattan in a limo with my uncles. And he was actually wearing the same thing he was wearing in one of the pictures, like the exact same outfits. I have pictures of him like next to himself, twin reality. It was weird. But sadly, my uncle did pass away 6 months after I exhibited this work. And so, you know, I had given a lecture, I forget where, you know, not too long after, and I was talking about this work and I started crying, and that was really embarrassing. And I won't cry today. But, you know, for a long time I stopped showing this work because I didn't know how to talk about it, and all of the things it meant at the time, and then realizing after he died what it really did mean to me. And so I put this work away for a long time. And I also, you know, I print in the darkroom. Now I'm printing more digitally than in the darkroom because of all the issues with paper and all of those things. But at that time I was printing in the darkroom, and so all of these scans are like from when I didn't know how to scan, and so I haven't resolved that. I've just started rescanning all of these things. And so at one point I think I'll start putting this work back together. I've been sort of repositioning the objects and the portraits and making triptychs and re-visualizing the work. But for now, you're the only one who's going to see it. So, you know, the thing also with this, with the interest in these objects, for me, this is a really poignant object because my grandmother, when she was alive, took care of my uncle. He had mental illness. He was paranoid schizophrenic. He was on medication since I was a small child. And he wound up getting a divorce. He had this happen to him in his 30s. He already had 3 children and a wife, and everything kind of fell apart for him in his life after that. So he sort of raised me. I mean, my mom moved us back to Queens from California when I was 2. And so I was raised with my grandmother, 2 of my uncles, and my mom. And so this image for me, the Pieta, is so revealing as to not just his religious character, but this of the mother carrying the child and the son and really sort of taking care of him throughout life. And that's sort of what we did with my uncle. Sort of ending on a happy-ish note. Sorry. So after my uncle passed away, I was devastated, of course. This was like a father figure to me, and I didn't realize it until he passed away. It took, you know, I always thought of myself as not having a father because my father was in California and he didn't raise us, and we had limited contact with him. And so I didn't realize until the death of my uncle that I actually had a biological father and 2 uncles who were my father figures. And so upon losing him, it was a real paradigm shift for me in thinking about how I relate to my family and how I see myself in the world. And I started making this work. I actually thought about this work for a year before making it. I stopped kind of making work for a little bit because I wasn't sure what to shoot or what to do. The work that I had been making before was very much more political, and now I've started sort of focusing on the personal. This series is called What Remains, and these are all white undershirts that I found in my Uncle Vinny's dresser drawer after he passed away, when going through that sort of ritual of cleaning out someone's things, figuring out, you know, what am I going to keep? What am I going to give away? What's going to get thrown out? Which is really hard for me because I'm like I always say I could be on that show Hoarders. I'm not that bad, but when I see that, I get scared. Like, I'm like, oh, throw that out because one day I'll have like a dead cat under all of this stuff and it'll be really, really bad. But I do like to hold on to things. I am kind of like overly sentimental and attached to things. So as I was going through his stuff, I was looking through these drawers and I just stopped and I found all these white shirts and they were all folded really neatly in the drawer. And some were completely like stained and ripped, and I think one had like a cough drop on it or something. I mean, but they were all like washed, laundered, folded, ironed, and kept in the drawer. And it really reminded me, for me, it was so poetic and reminded me so much about who my uncle was and all of his imperfections and the way that he was mentally unstable at times. And we always saw that side of him, even though he was on medication, and at that point in his life, he was used to being on medication. Just thinking about how we don't have to be perfect in order for someone to love us, like deeply and consumedly. And so for me, that was also really important in this work, was thinking about showing the imperfections and showing the body, in a sense, showing the absence of the body, but still creating something that had so much left of the person that had used them and worn them. And I had just hung these in my fake studio in the basement from the rafters with twine, and they started twisting on their own from the twine, and I was like, stay still, damn you shirts. And then I realized that they were creating these they were almost sort of dancing. And so as I was photographing them, as they were sort of slightly shifting and moving, which I think is what animates them to a certain degree. And I guess I'm going to tell this goofy story because every time I think about this work, I sort of think about this story. When I was in high school, I was going out with this boy for like 2.5 years. It was like the first love. This is so embarrassing. I have a friend in the audience. And he was a year older than me, so he went away to college before I did. And I used to like wear his clothes, and so I had this Tommy Hilfiger t-shirt of his, and it still smelled like him. I think it was just the smell of Tide, but at that time my parents didn't use Tide, so for me it smelled like heaven. And so he went away to school, and it was like I was missing him, and I realized that the shirt still had his scent. And I was like, oh, I know what I'm gonna do. And so I took the shirt and I put it in like a Ziploc bag, and I hid it in the closet, and I was like, when I'm having a really low moment, I'm gonna smell the shirt and, get my fill of Kevin for a minute. And then, I kind of forgot about it, and then he broke up with me, and it was so devastating. He did it on the phone. It was really horrible. And I was really sad. And then I remember like a couple weeks after that, I thought, oh, I have that shirt. Like I was really, I was depressed, dumped, and I'm like, where's that shirt? I just need to smell him, and I was all pitiful. And I went into the closet, and I opened the bag, and I was like, and it smelled like the plastic from the bag. And I just remember sobbing, like uncontrollable. It's like losing something again. And for me, this work, that story kind of just reminds me of how, clothing, it's so intimate, especially the undershirts. It touches your body. It's something worn so close to the skin and so intimate. And for me, looking at these shirts was really about dealing with this consumption of loss and longing, this desire for something that's no longer there, and that feeling of longing and that pain of longing for something that will never be again. Sorry, that was my little story. So this series is also not on my website for just bad reasons. Also scanning issues. I don't know. I scan. I do like freelance scanning for people, and sometimes I don't scan my own stuff. But I have an intern now who's scanning all of my stuff, so I'm getting back to where I need to be. But this series this is my Uncle Al, and this is a series called Guayaberas Series. And if you guys don't know, it's the Mexican-style wedding shirt that he's wearing. And my uncle's been wearing these same shirts for, well over 30 years, as long as I've known him. There's pictures of him, from I think the 50s maybe is when he started with this shirt. But it's like his uniform. So I started thinking about the T-shirt series of my Uncle Vinny, What Remains, and how like sad I was getting and how my work was really depressing. And I wanted to do something a little bit more fun, a little bit more about life and appreciating life. And also, you know, I hadn't shot my uncle in a really long time, since grad school, since the environmental portraits. And I was super sad to lose like my star model, because Uncle Vinny, he was like mine. He would do anything I wanted. Like, you know, when I was little, I would paint his nails with markers, and that was the relationship we had. And so I just felt like, you know, it would be more annoying to ask Uncle Al, and maybe he's not going to be a good model, and I don't know what's going to happen. And so I brought him down into my fake studio, and I put up this weird backdrop that I bought for this project. And he just kept like, you know, I don't know if he was like waiting for me to take the pictures, because you set up the 4x5, you set up the lights, you're testing, you know, and I'm just like, oh man, I didn't want to direct him. I just wanted to see what happened. And every shot, I looked at my contact sheets and I'm like, this guy, it's like, I think I only had 2 shots where he was normal, and every other shot he's like this. And then I realized, I'm like, oh, like looking at the contact sheets, like as I'm printing, this is why I miss the darkroom. Like you discover things in the darkroom that you may not have sought out when you were shooting. Because I was like, I'm gonna have to shoot him like 100 times, like every day, to get that one off pose. And then I was like, oh no, he wears the same shirt every day. Like he's super consistent. Like that's who he is. It kind of became like what the series was about. And I don't know if you guys noticed the zipper in that one. I just thought I'd point that out. He has like, you know, snaps, zippers, buttons. And so I started, you know, I started printing them and selecting every single shirt that he has, and decided to make a grid out of it to kind of play on the fact that he's doing the same thing and he's super consistent and he's wearing the same thing. And you know, I never really finished this series. I'm waiting for him to get a couple of more shirts. I have like almost enough for 3 grids, but not quite. He orders these shirts from a catalog, and he has a lot of different colors. So I don't know. Hopefully he'll get a couple more, and we'll do it. I did this project like over a year and a half, or almost 2 years. Every time he would get shirts, I'd be like, oh, let's go photograph you in your new shirt. And I bought him a couple, like when I was in Cuba, I bought him a shirt like that, and once in a while I'll pick him up one, but he has so many of them. So I also was thinking with this series, like this idea of portraiture and, you know, like historically how we think about portraiture. And I saw this background, and I like this sort of like crazy old patina look. It sort of reminds me of like a kitschy Sears portrait studio shots, but it also, oh, and that one, his eyes are closed. It's the only one with his eyes closed. But it also reminds me a lot of painting, and about like sort of like the history of painting and the portrait and like the Renaissance paintings. And so I thought it'd be interesting to kind of use something that alludes to the history of portraiture, you know, from kitsch to a very sort of classical portraiture. And I don't know, it's hard to tell in these slides, but they're printed darker. I printed them down, and a little bit cyan, so that all of the veins, which I thought were really interesting in his arms, sort of show through a little bit more, and the whole thing has sort of a patina look to it. And this work was shown at the Queens International 4, which is the Queens Museum's biennial show, and it's open by a submission process, so anyone that lives or works in Queens can apply to it, and I would suggest if anybody does, to apply to the show. It's a fantastic show. They make a beautiful catalog, and over 3,000 people came to the opening night, which was insane, and it got a lot of press, so it was a really great show to be a part of. And this is the second grid. I envision it as 3 grids kind of looking at each other with like a glass windowed space. Hasn't happened yet, but one day. Okay, so I wanted to show you guys, I mean, you guys are in school, and so I thought it would be fun to show you some of my student work. This is some of the work I was playing around with when I was in grad school. It was stuff that I shot when I would come home from San Francisco and take pictures. This is a photograph of my grandmother's chair, and she had passed away when I was in college. But no one ever sat in her chair, and so I always thought that was interesting that even after death, someone's space was still their space, and just nobody ever sat there, ever. And there's Uncle Vinny. So these were the portraits I was making when I first started thinking about photographing my family. I didn't really talk about this work too much in school. My other projects were really, really different from this. Maybe way more conceptual at the time. And I was shooting with like this old Mamiya twin lens camera and a Rolly, and I'm using just available light. But they're not bad. Now that I'm looking at them, I'm like, they're okay. I made a couple of good ones. But this was sort of just the first thoughts. I think of them as a sketch for what I was doing now. And see, they have their own chairs, and it's like everyone had their own space. And I was also thinking a lot about the space itself of the home and like where the domestic structure and how things are always the same. I mean, now it's changed, actually. They gave the lamps away, and we got new furniture. And just note the TV, that I think this was 2003, and that was still working. That was the same TV that I watched when I was a kid. But you'll see it again soon. And so, yeah, this was the first gesture, like a sketch, just the first ideas about my family and this project. Oh, and I didn't really point it out earlier, but I had shot like a half a glass of water as one of the objects, because he always had like a half a glass of water. Be like, get me some water. And it's always had to be like a half a glass of water full on the table next to him. Very weird. So there's the TVs now. So that's my mom. And so this is the work that I'm currently still working on. It's called Home Away from Home. And this is all post my uncle's death, photographing my mom and my Uncle Al in our house. I'm not living there anymore, but I was living there for a few years after grad school. But thinking more, I think, after my uncle's passing away, I think I began to see them differently, more fragile, more vulnerable, and just really focused on their mortality, knowing I have this limited time with them, and being afraid of that, and not really knowing, and feeling sad and wanting to have them. And so the eye patch, and my mom looking really tired, ironing my dress, of course, talking about how spoiled I am, and just like in day-to-day activities, just at home. This is the only portraitless portrait. This was my Uncle Vinny's bedroom, and I knew I wanted to photograph it. It took me a year after he passed away. I wouldn't let, it was like became storage for Christmas presents or something my mom was putting in there. I was like, nobody can touch it because I'm gonna make a photograph, but I couldn't do it for a really long time. And the walls are actually that color. It was like a seafoam green, but all the brown that you see in the paint, it's really evident in the print, it's all nicotine because my uncle smoked. And it took a day and a half to mop the walls with stuff coming out. It's like a mop. It was really intense. So I just thought I'd point that out for my own little stop smoking ad. It's big in New York City. And this is a holiday. This is on Easter. And so I've just been photographing them just in there every day and on holidays and birthdays and holidays. This was on Halloween. My uncle decided to dress up for the first time ever. My mom and him go to a party, a costume party, and he never dressed up. But he made this costume himself. It's Pinocchio. They're really fun. I know my pictures are like really depressing. I was talking to Jaime earlier, and I'm like, all my pictures are really sad, but it's like, it has more to do with how I feel about them than with their personalities. It's my mom. She won that year. It's Raggedy Ann. I just shot them this year. My uncle was a banana, and my mom was a gorilla. It's really, or a chimp. She's short. She was a chimp. It was awesome. It's coming to the website soon. This is them watching Dancing with the Stars. It's like they love Dancing with the Stars. She's enraptured. Opening Christmas presents. Me and my brother shared, we like fought over the couch. And then my chair in the table is on this side. It's like Uncle Al, my mom, me, and my brother, and it used to be Uncle Vinny, and no one sits there anymore. Well, my boyfriend sits there now when he comes over. And this is actually the other eye. He had his cataracts removed, and now he has like 20/20 vision. Like, I'm like, what does that sign say? I'm driving. I'm like, huh? Like, can you look at that, Uncle Al? And he's got perfect vision. He looks beat up. My mom doesn't sleep. I used to say old people don't sleep, but I guess it's just my mom that doesn't sleep. She stays up like all night long. She has a good girlfriend in California, and she talks on the phone like till 3 in the morning or something crazy. I was saying I never photographed them outside. Like, this is the closest to like photographing them outside. She went to Dunkin' Donuts, and she's wearing 2 different gloves after I just gave her brand new gloves for Christmas. It's like, Mom, it's old people. They have their like funny ways of doing things. I'm well versed in it. That's Uncle Al on his birthday. But yeah, I've been working on this for the last 6.5 years. I've been making these pictures, and so I'm in the process now. I mean, I'm still shooting. I don't live there anymore, but I live only 5 blocks away. I moved to an apartment 5 blocks away. And so I'm there a lot, and I think I'm building a studio in my old bedroom. I'm painting right now. So I should be there more often. And I'm really just trying to edit. I've shot so much, and I'm just scanning and just going through and printing. I had a show of this work, a solo show of this work, in Queens in Long Island City at the Homefront Gallery earlier in this past fall. And that really was a great push to make some work, like to look at everything and to go through it and to find all the new ones that I was excited about printing. They're standing where the Christmas tree was taken out. And that's a really good thing too. I mean, for me, in my process as an artist, working as a fine arts photographer and also an artist, applying for grants, applying for opportunities, I do a lot of that. At one point I was doing more. Like 2 years ago, I think I was applying for like 40 things a year. Grants, residencies, exhibitions sometimes, but more like grants and residency opportunities, which I think are some of the most important things I've done have been residencies that have helped my work. Getting this grant from the Queen's Council, it was a $2,500 grant, which isn't humongous, but it mounted the show and paid for all the expenses of the show and paid me as well. You should always pay yourself when you write a grant. They want to see that, so that I think is important to know as students. You don't learn that stuff, but yeah, pay yourself out of the grant. I paid myself close to $1,000 to produce the work for my time. So I think that's really critical as well. I'm like, oh, she fell. I didn't beat her up. She tripped. But, you know, as I've been making this work, I think my parents are becoming way more collaborative in the process as they see me presenting the work, and they're like mini celebrities at the openings. You know, my mom's raising the towel so we can see her knee that was injured, and you know, she's posing sort of very classically and doing that on her own. And she's the one who came and was like, oh, I just took a shower. You want to take my picture? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, great, so let's do it. I'm like running for my camera. So it's been a really interesting process as the works develop, sort of working with them and allowing them their input and, you know, and how they want to be viewed and how they want to be imaged. And my mom has a lot of ideas for making pictures. She's into it now. So this series is called Home Away from Home because I'm photographing them at home, but I'm also taking them on trips once a year and photographing them in hotel rooms in various countries. So after my uncle Vinny passed away, about 3 or 4 months later, I mean, we were really depressed, and it was unexpected. He got pneumonia at Christmas, and within 3 weeks of the new year, he was passed away. Because he smoked, he couldn't get off the respirator. His lungs weren't strong enough, and he couldn't live without the respirator. So it was really devastating for everybody. But in a way, the good thing that came out of it was my uncle took care of everyone. He never married, Uncle Al, and he took care of my grandmother after she split with my grandfather. He had a sister who had Down syndrome who lived to 35, and he took care of her her whole life. And when my uncle moved back in after having a divorce with his family and problems with his family, he took care of him too. So in a way, it was really nice for them to be able to do stuff for themselves. Like I used to travel all the time. I was never in New York. I studied abroad 3 times in my undergraduate, and I spent like 9 months in Africa and a few months in India, and just really loved traveling. And so for me, I'd always say like, oh, do you want to go on a trip? And he's like, who's going to take care of Uncle Vinny? And so that was something that I wanted to share with them, or to make something positive out of something negative. So after Uncle Vinny passed away, I booked a cruise. I thought I'd start slow with the cruise, but I didn't realize that I get really seasick. So it's really hard for me to be on a cruise. So we did a cruise to Bermuda, and I took a picture of my mom, which I think is in here, inside the cruise cabin. And after we came back, I was looking at all the pictures, and I realized, oh, this is so interesting, like her in this other domestic's, weird interior room. And I was thinking, like, what a great idea to take them on a trip every year. So this is just from last summer. We went to the Jersey Shore, which is where my mom used to take us when we were little. We're staying more local these days because Uncle Al has a heart condition that doesn't really allow him to travel just yet. He's like, when this one breaks, I get a new one. So we'll see what happens. He may need open heart surgery, but hopefully not. But he's healthy and he's fine. That's why I'm joking. But he's afraid to go far in case he would need medical attention. This is in Melbourne in Australia. Yeah, we made it far. So for the last 5 years, we've taken a trip every year. I think we might do like Atlantic City or something and stay overnight, like high rollers or whatever. This was in Madrid in Spain. And again, when I think about my work, or I'm saying again because Jaime interviewed me earlier, so I feel like I already said all these things, but I think that I look a lot towards painting. And so not just in the images that you'll see coming up of my still lifes, but also in the portraits as well, like this sense of light and color and composition that I feel like I get a lot of from painting. This was also in the Jersey Shore. And that was in Cairns, Australia. We went to the Great Barrier Reef, and Glau took a glass-bottom boat. It was cool. But just thinking in these about these sort of faux domestic spaces, like the confines of 4 walls and what that means, and thinking about this idea of home conceptually, like what does that mean? This is the picture that I shot. It's hard to see now, but there's like wood paneling in the background. And this was in Sydney as well. Uncle Al said Australia was the best trip of his life. He was in the army, I guess World War II, at the end of the war. And so he'd been to a lot of, he'd been to Spain, he'd been to Italy and France or whatever. And so when I suggested Australia, it was like, oh, I've never been to Australia. So I kind of roped him in with that one. Okay. So this series, Vanitas, is probably the work that I'm the best known for, or has gotten the most press or publicity or whatever you call it. And I started this series when I was applying in 2008. I wanted to apply to the Center for Photography at Woodstock's residency. If you guys don't know about the Center for Photography at Woodstock, You should find out about it. It's an amazing organization in Woodstock, New York. And they put on shows throughout the year, and then in the summer they have a residency program. The residency program is for people of color only, but they do workshops with really amazing photographers, Daoud Bey and Angelica Rinhofer and Eleanor Carucci. I mean, all kinds of people have taught there over the years, and every year it's different. They do these weekend workshops, and they have an auction, and it's just an amazing organization that I would say look into. It's also a great resource for artists, looking on their website. But to apply for this residency, I really wanted this residency, and I thought, okay, what am I going to do? You have to put a proposal together. You have to tell them what you're going to do with the time. They give you a few $1,000s. They give you a food stipend, a travel stipend, and a place to live, and equipment. And they want to know what you're going to do with that. And so I thought about it, and I had always been really in love with Vanitas painting and still life painting in general, Dutch still life painting. And I had always thought about sort of doing my own take on these paintings. I mean, the idea of Vanitas is that life and youth and beauty is ephemeral and fleeting, and that we're all slowly moving towards death. Everything that's alive is in the process of decaying and dying. And so with my cheery disposition and interest, I thought this would be perfect to sort of do my own take on it, except in my photographs I'm using objects that I've held on to for a really long time. So that's a toy from Mexico that I got when I was little, paired with rotting fruit and wilting flowers, obviously more so than in the paintings themselves, but this idea of really pushing that idea of decay. And then objects that also had belonged to my grandmother that I've held on to, sort of family artifacts, and pairing those things together. Talking about the power of objects, talking about memory, the passage of time. I'm really interested in familial legacy and the stories that get handed down with objects. And in more than a few of these, I'm using photographs within the photographs to sort of play on that idea of nostalgia and the role that photography plays in memory itself. How photographs operate. Sometimes I feel like I look at things and I only have that memory because I have the photograph. Like, do I really remember my second birthday party? But I remember the image of it. And so that's an interesting place. And then obviously, I'm being really heavy-handed with the skulls and the symbols of Vanitas themselves, the wilting flowers, and the rotting fruit. I left this in my studio overnight. I was actually eating it, and then came back and photographed it the next day. I was like, oh, this is so much better than yesterday. And I continued this series. So I had this 1-month residency in Woodstock, and I basically just shot while I was there. Had amazing support. I shot with an 8x10 camera for the first time. All of these are shot on the 4x5, but I have a handful of them on the 8x10, so I just thought it'd be fun to learn while I was there from one of the masters who was there. And I kept printing this work when I got home, and I still had so many objects that I wanted to shoot. And so I applied for another residency that anybody in New York should know about or have on their radar. It's the LMCC's Workspace Residency. It's the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council. They do a 10-month residency for artists in New York. They don't give you a place to live. You have to find your own housing. But they give you about $1,000 stipend, which who cares? But the really amazing thing is they give you a beautiful studio. My studio was just a little bit smaller than this room. I had a really big room in Lower Manhattan, so on Maiden Lane, a block off of Wall Street. And they also brought in curators and writers and arts professionals to do studio visits with you every week. So it was an amazing opportunity that really, I think, helped push my career as well, introduced so many people to my work. I sold work from that in the open studio, so that it was just an amazing experience. And you work with 20 artists all together in the studios and 9 writers. So it was a fantastic way to kind of keep up your practice and also be really inspired by people making work all around you. And so I would get on their mailing list, because they also do they do workshops that are free. You just have to be quick to sign up. So if you're on the mailing list and you get the email, you can sign up really quickly and RSVP. But they have, you know, how to do your taxes for an artist, how to create a work sample for applying to things. I mean, they have these amazing workshops that are completely free. Budgeting 101, which I went to and then used when I was putting my budget together for the grant. Otherwise, I would have, what I thought a budget was really different than what a professional budget actually is. And just learning the business of how to be an artist, which I think is extremely important. And, you know, it's not really part of the curriculum at, I don't know any school that really teaches that. I took a professional practices course in San Francisco when I got my MFA, but it was just like this one wacky teacher who made it up, and was amazing. It was like, oh, what? It's hard out there. Like, you know, you have to know how to write a press release. You have to know how to market yourself. When I first got out of grad school, I was really lucky. I met a dealer, like an independent dealer, and she was selling my work, and we were doing really well together. But I kind of thought that the business of art was going to be handled by her, and that all I had to do was make it, and she would sell it, and it was this great relationship. And I went to openings and did my hair or whatever, and like had a great time, drank wine. And I realized that, you know, it was good. It was a good relationship. I was making money from my artwork, which is great. But at the same time, I wasn't furthering my career, getting the recognition that I wanted, or getting in the collections that I wanted, or the kind of exhibitions that I wanted, and was sort of limited. And she was sort of furthering herself as a dealer and a curator, and had, you know, specific goals. And what I wanted really wasn't, you know, I mean, it wasn't her job. And I realized what it means to be an artist and what that job entails, and marketing and all of those things that are boring, doing your taxes and budgeting and figuring all those things out, are really, really crucial. And no one else is going to do it as well. You know, even if you have someone doing it, you should always be doing your own press and marketing and know how to do it. And figuring out what you want and where you want your work to be and who your audience is, I think, is really, really crucial to the process. And I learned the hard way. So it took me, I stopped working with her. We had a few differences, and I decided to stop working with her. And I didn't make money. I didn't sell anything for 2 years, and that was crazy. It was really hard. That was a hard time. I was like, maybe I should go beg my way back to like working with her. And then I started to figure out, you know, applying for residencies, applying for grants, getting your work seen by the right people. You know, building a community, I think, is really important. Having a set of friends, going to all the openings and meeting people, and talking about your work and supporting other people's shows and lectures and exhibitions, and just being genuine, you know, getting to know other people, getting to know people's work and what they're passionate about, and supporting them and getting that support back, I think, is like one of the most crucial things you can do as an artist or a photographer to help yourself in the business. Okay, so we're winding down to the end. I'm only going to show you guys 2 more bodies of work. This is it's a piece, really. I work so much in series that I think of everything as a series, but it's one piece. It's 4 images. They're 30 by 40. And it's a little dark in the slide here, but they're photographs of my Uncle Vinny's drawers. So when I was talking about pulling stuff out of his drawers to photograph the T-shirts, as I was doing that, I kind of had like a little mini breakdown and decided that I couldn't do that anymore, and that I saved 4 of the drawers as they were, and wouldn't let anyone touch them, and just was like, I'm going to photograph these. And it took me years to do it, because I had first photographed them in my homemade studio with a 6.7 camera, and all the, if you know, like all the angles were all crazy and they just look weird. And it took me a while to bring them to the studio, to re-photograph them in 4x5 with the proper lights and make them look the way that I wanted them to look. But the piece is called These Last Things, and I took the name from the the Novissima in Catholicism. Again, I'm not super religious, but that is what I was raised as. And it's sort of the four last things are, is it death, judgment, heaven, or hell. And so I was sort of thinking about that and thinking about how, these very secular objects can kind of take on this almost religious or sacred importance for me and for people who have something left behind, and just the physicality of death, I think. Because for me, these are the last things that I'm going to photograph of his. And this, I thought I would get rid of the stuff in the drawers after I photographed them, but I haven't done that yet. I'm really trying to let go, I really am, with the photography. But now it's like more precious because I have the photograph of it. But these are the last things that I'm going to photograph of his, and just thinking about that finality and that physicality of death and the things that we leave behind, and what those objects mean. And so the last thing is just to show you some stuff that I'm working on now. It's completely different from all the things you've seen. This is it's called On Gratitude, and I'm basically making photograms of plastic shopping bags that say thank you. I've been collecting these bags. I am a little weird, and I do like to collect things. Hoarding, we talked about that. So I've been collecting all different bags. I started doing this in San Francisco like 8 years ago. They made really pretty bags in Chinatown in San Francisco, like pink and red bags with flowers. And I noticed how many different bags there were, how many different designs there were. And this is one of the pink bags. So it's the reverse. I'm doing both color and black and white photograms. They're 20 by 24 inches. And I've just been trying to collect as many different styles of bags as possible. And I started making this piece thinking about sort of how plastic bags are just kind of dying out. It's not in vogue to use plastic bags anymore. We all have our little recycled green bags, and I have them as well. But I kind of miss these objects in a weird way. I like this idea of taking a very sort of real nice gesture or sentiment, or this act of being thankful or gratitude, and kind of walking out with that, even though it's this really consumerist thing. This one I got in San Diego. And so I really don't know where I'm going with this or what I'm doing. It may be like a giant grid. They're all one of a kind, the photograms. And so I'm just sort of piecing it together now. But I thought I'd share that with you guys. And again, it's sort of an object in a different formulation, but it's sort of the way my mind works. So I think I'm ending just on time. This is one from San Francisco. You can see the Golden Gate Bridge and the cup that says, "Have a good day." So that's all I have for you guys. Thank you very much. The photograms is really simple. You take the bags are transparent, and so I'm just laying them down on the photographic paper itself with glass, and then processing the paper. I can dial in with the color. I can dial in the colors to get the colors to somewhat of what I want. Obviously, it's going to have the reverse. So if it's a yellow bag, it's going to be blue. If it's a pink bag, it's green. And the black and white are just black and white and fiber prints. I'm using Profoto, a lighting kit, with a large softbox and a fill light, but a very simple, just sort of mimicking, Dutch window lighting. Those are scans from the negatives, but they're not as nice as the prints are. So the earlier scans are like ones that because I left that work alone for so long, I didn't want to rescan them. And I'm in the process of doing that and matching. What I used to do was print in the darkroom and then scan and then match the darkroom prints. And now I'm printing less in the darkroom and just working from the files, which is a little bit sad for me. I miss that process. But anything that I have a darkroom print of, I'm matching, making a match digital C print of. No, I'm shooting all 4x5 and 6x7. I don't own a digital camera.
Why? You just don't like digital?
I love film. I love 4x5, and I love, especially for the still life work. I mean, my parents, I'm shooting 6x7, on a Mamiya 7. It's just really handy, and using an on-camera flash to shoot those. But for the studio stuff, they're so rich, and just the detail you can get, and the richness and subtleties of color and light that you can get with film, you can't get with digital yet. So go with what you know. That's what I'm doing for now. And I enjoy the process. I mean, I'm thinking about getting a 5D just to play around with, but I haven't done it yet. I mean, that's why in the beginning I didn't really show them what I was shooting, and I was sort of afraid, you know, how can you say, oh, I'm afraid you're gonna die, and so I'm taking these pictures of you so that I won't be so sad. So no, I think, you know, if you ask my mom's like, she said to a couple of people who have asked her, oh, Justine, she likes to photograph us in the raw. Like, that's her, like, catchphrase, because she never has makeup on when I'm photographing her at home. So it's like her way of like being like, sometimes I have makeup on and she doesn't get those pictures. But for them, I think it's just like that interaction with me, and it's like a fun way for them to be. It's like traveling with me. It's like a way for us to bond where they're a part of my life. You know, we're not, you know, I do things with them normal, like I take them to the movies, I take them to Trader Joe's or whatever, and we hang out, like they're awesome. But it's a way for them to do something that's deeply rooted in what I do in my life, and for them to be a part of it. Like my mom on Facebook now. I'm not trying to make them look bad. They're honest. I'm really interested in taking pictures that are tender and honest, but very real, and show like my experience of them. For most of the portraits are natural light with a bounce flash. So if you know the window is here, I'll bounce the flash from the ceiling this way, mimicking natural light, but using flash because it's too dark inside to capture that. And I'm not working with a tripod for most, you know, 98% of them. Yeah.